Bilal ibn Rabah al-Habashi is arguably the most famous or one of the most famous companions. Likely, more cinematic films have been made about him than any other companion. Wherever you go in the world, on every continent, young Muslim children know his name and story. He is the most famous Abyssinian in Islamic history. Anyone who has ever experienced trauma, suffering, oppression, and exploitation may find resonance in the story of Bilal, as he endured suffering for much of his early life. His virtues have been praised for over 1,000 years by both Sunnis and Shiites. While I fully support going beyond Bilal, we must also simultaneously remember his massive role in Syria and the Islamic conquests. There is a reason he is buried in Damascus, Syria. May God be pleased with Bilal, the first caller to prayer, the first muezzin. While it's common knowledge that Bilal was Abyssinian, he was born in Mecca and grew up speaking Arabic as his native language. Abyssinia was a large empire encompassing much of the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, and so on. Jewish Himyar Yemen and Christian Abyssinia had gotten embroiled in the political conflicts of their time. It's well known that the Byzantine Romans and Sassanid Persians had been the two world superpowers gridlocked in war for centuries before and during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The Christian Abyssinians were allied with Christian Rome, and the Jewish Yemenis were allied with Zoroastrian Persia. From 200 current era to the Abyssinian invasion of Arabia in 570 CE, year of the elephant, Yemen and Abyssinia have been at war with much of Arabia caught in the middle. In summation, the Yemenis lost to the Abyssinians, and a Christian puppet state was set up in Yemen by the Abyssinians. Abraha was the Abyssinian ruler of Yemen who marched with the elephant to Mecca. Abraha was building a massive church in Sana'a, Yemen, and did not want any other religious building to rival it. Therefore, Abraha marched towards Mecca to destroy the Kaaba in the famous story we all know, so that no temple or religious building could rival his church in Yemen. Why would this matter so much to Abraha, who was half white, Roman, and half black, Abyssinian? Well, Yemen used to be a major power in the region during the time of Queen Sheba. Bill Keys, Professor Bill Glanzman, while at the University of Calgary in the year 2000, found a 3,000-year-old temple from the reign of the Queen of Sheba in a dig in Yemen. The discovery was hailed as one of the greatest archaeological finds since the ruins of Pompeii and the pyramids of Giza. The Temple of Sheba, or Ma-Ram Bilqis, was a site of pilgrimage from 1200 BCE to 550 CE. If you remember the timeline from the last video in this series, that would mean that Queen Sheba's temple was established in antiquity and was still in use during late antiquity, during the lifetime of Abd al-Muttalib. In other words, Abraha wanted to build the biggest church in Yemen, because Yemen was known as a site of major temples and pilgrimage. If you have any doubts about this, just ask American actors Jimmy Smits and Halle Berry. Their 1995 movie, Solomon and Sheba, will give you a chuckle. Anyways, I prefer Smits as Bail Organa in Star Wars, but I digress.
It rejoices the birds, grieves the fish, embraces the dead.
Birds of Sheba eat flaxseed. You trap your fish in flaxen nets, your linen shrouds are also woven of flax. Why have you been sent here, Nicole?
To lay various proposals before your wisdom as to how we can help one another live in peace.
His Majesty needs help from no one. He is the Lord's chosen.
Then why do you answer for him, if he is capable of doing everything for himself?
The prophet Nathan is how the Lord speaks to me.
How very convenient.
There were always very powerful queens. Some of them would rise up to fame and glory, such as some of the Egyptian queens like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, for example. But this Queen of Sheba is a little bit different. Without her name, we can't identify her actually as a historical figure. We need to find some link, if there is one, to find the historical reality of that queen and the stories that surround her.
The site covers 60,000 square meters, more than the size of 8 football fields, and every inch must be cleared by hand. Progress is slow, constantly hampered by dust devils that appear and disappear without warning. In Arabic folklore, these desert whirlwinds, sometimes called jinn or genie, have an intimate connection with the legendary Queen of Sheba. For in old Bedouin tales, Sheba was born of such a spirit. According to a fable set in Sheba's ancient capital of Marib, then a grand and prosperous city, there lived among the many merchants a beautiful spirit called Umayya. Umayya fell madly in love with an important advisor to the king, and from their illicit affair, a daughter was born. Half human, half genie. They named the child Bilqis and gave her to the spirits of the desert to raise. As she grew up, Bilqis learned from passing caravans that an evil king had come to rule Marib. One night she slipped into the king's chamber and plunged a dagger through his heart, saving the people of Sheba and replacing him as their ruler. Two weeks into the dig, and Marilyn's hopes are raised of finding a link between the site and the legend of the Queen of Sheba. A telltale inscription emerges from the sand.
Oh my God. Huh? Ooh. This is a really big structure, isn't it? Solid.
It mentions a king here, the name of a king, and we have here also.
The inscriptions support the idea that the temple was a royal building.
We have Damar Ali, king of Saba.
The inscriptions are like billboards. They proclaimed royal edicts and offered devotions to the temple's god.
It's a kind of decree.
Wendell never saw this, or never saw the inside.
But if this really was a royal building, it will surely contain additional royal inscriptions, perhaps even royal graves. Wendell Phillips had been unable to prove the sanctuary was old enough to be associated with the Queen of Sheba. But modern dating techniques have completely overturned traditional assumptions about the site's age.
We do know that the sanctuary goes back at least as early as the time of King Solomon, around 950 to 900 BC, and actually much earlier than that, for over 500, 600 years earlier, would suggest that if there is any connection at all to be found with a single historic figure, a single Queen of Sheba, it will be found here.
Back to Abraha trying to destroy the Kaaba in Mecca.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول.
According to traditional Sirah sources, 570, the year of the elephant, was the year that the Prophet Muhammad was born. It was also the year when Bilal's mother, Hammamah, was captured by the Quraysh and enslaved. Hammamah was an Abyssinian woman on the side of Abraha. She was captured as a prisoner of war, and thus enslaved as was customary in late antiquity. Bilal and his mother were technically clients or mawla in Arabic of the clan Beni Jumah. This was a well-known clan within the tribe known as the Quraysh, who controlled all of Mecca, as we mentioned in the previous video. Unfortunately, while we know exactly who Bilal's mother is, traditional Sirah sources only record that his father of an enslaved black man of unknown ancestry. Was Bilal's history Arab-washed? Perhaps, we will never know. What we do know is that Bilal, may God be pleased with him, was one of the first converts to Islam. However, none of the classical sources give an exact conversion story for Bilal, like Sirah often does for many other companions. Why was Bilal's life story left with gaps? Perhaps classical scholars wanted to focus on more important details of Bilal's life. We may never know. What we can be somewhat certain about is how Bilal became interested in Islam. His enslaver was Umayyah bin Khalaf al-Jumahi, who was a major oligarch of Mecca and staunch enemy of the early Muslims. Bilal would have witnessed Umayyah's torture of early Muslims or rumors of it. Bilal probably overheard conversations about this new religion, Islam, would hurt the profit margins of the Meccan oligarchs, because Islam's ideas of pilgrimage undermined the Quraysh's business model to profit off of pagan pilgrimage. Pagans just had so many more gods. Each idol is a commodity to commodify in exchange for more and more wealth. Greed drove the violent stratagems of the Quraysh. Umayyah was constantly fretting over Muhammad's new religion and his followers. Umayyah spoke about the companions with rage, malice, and anxiety. As Bilal watched his oppressor stress over losing money, the most rebellious and freeing thing he could have done was to become Muslim. An Abyssinian enslaved man becoming Muslim, rich and powerful, would certainly subvert Meccan culture, flipping it upside down from its classist, racist, oppressive power structures. Remember, the Abyssinians were the recent invading army, the recent enemy, and the Quraysh knew that monotheism was a direct threat to their commerce. They saw Christians and Jews fighting and arguing with one another constantly in Arabia for centuries, and the Quraysh saw this as a nuisance. They knew about the slaughter in Najran. Everybody in the region knew that history. Moreover, Mecca was the cultural capital city of polytheism, so they couldn't have monotheism spread there. Umayyah and the other oligarchs not only complained of this new religion, but also were confused how this noble, truthful, loyal man, Muhammad bin Abd Allah, could be the person causing such strife in Meccan society. While overhearing the geriatric Meccan oligarchs complain about Islam and Muhammad, Bilal heard how al-Islam embraced equality of all people before God and rejected inequities in society. He heard how Islam is an egalitarian message that encouraged peaceful relations in society, whereas late antique mercantilism caused constant strife and oppression. Bilal would secretly sneak to Muhammad and embrace Islam, one of the first people to do so, but it was all in secret so the clan of Juma would not know. If any clan member found out, surely they would have informed Umayyah, who was extremely influential amongst them. Bilal hid his Islam at first. His early conversion, however, made him famous for all of history. The Prophet, peace be upon him, famously said in a hadith, "The foremost converts are four. I am the foremost of the Arabs, Salman is the foremost of the Persians, Bilal is the foremost of the Abyssinians, and Suhaib is foremost of the Byzantines." The clan of Juma were the most arrogant and viciously heinous towards the Prophet Muhammad and early Muslim community. Once they found out their slaves were converting to Islam, they were humiliated in front of all of Quraysh, because they could not even prevent their own slaves from converting to Islam. They looked like weak punks, fam. The sad reality is that Bilal knew trauma long before he converted to Islam. Having been enslaved his entire life, he was the punching bag for all of the Quraysh, often terrorized by hooligans and anybody with slightly more power and a sadistic edge. Meccan rabble-rousers used to force Bilal to wear metal armor on his bare skin. They would leave Bilal with metal armor on his bare body in the desert sun so that his skin would sizzle and fry upon the heated metal. The sizzling sound of a steak on a cast iron pan comes to mind. This was Bilal's normal life, full of torture, racism, and hardship. This riffraff and hooligans would tie Bilal up and drag his body over the most rugged rocky terrain around Mecca. Many of these rocks are volcanic, and even from meteorites. They are certainly sharp enough to cut barefooted hikers, let alone a grown man being dragged by beasts of burden in the midday heat of the Arabian desert. Bilal's tortures were more than most of us can even comprehend. Imagine what years of such treatment would do to one's mental health. How did Bilal stay alive and keep hope? They would tie a rope around his neck and drag his body over sharp rocks. These brutes would simultaneously throw rocks at Bilal. After Bilal converted to Islam, he would simply say God is one, whenever anybody tortured him. Bilal wanted these pagans to know that no matter how much they mistreated him, Bilal was going to resist with every fiber of his being. by any means necessary. Abu Jahl used to force Bilal to lay face down upon the hot sand and place a boulder upon Bilal's back. So Bilal would be forced to bake in the hot sun under the fear of asphyxiation. As we know from George Floyd, being in the prone position with weight upon your back or neck will kill you very quickly. American police were trained to use this tactic by Israeli Defense Forces as part of the GIL-E program. The GIL-E program exists internationally, but in Georgia, they use the acronym to mean the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. Jason P. Armstrong, chief of the Ferguson Police Department in Missouri, naively stated, "What I was most impressed with about the program was learning how the Israeli police force was trying new ways to bring diversity to their police force and their police leadership. Diversity and representation is one of the main points of contention in American law enforcement. Communities are speaking out about police departments having a balanced representation of the communities they serve. It was eye-opening to see those same sentiments were holding true in Israel. Any law enforcement leader looking to expand their knowledge base and experience once-in-a-lifetime memorable moments, this program is top-notch." This statement is, frankly, embarrassing, as Du Bois, who you will remember from the last video in this series, was a prominent American sociologist that debunked diversity in policing as far back as 1899 with the publication of his monograph, The Philadelphia Negro, whereby Du Bois proves with sociological data that black cops were even more violent than their white counterparts. Modern data has continued to support this claim. In other words, Jason Armstrong is not only factually incorrect, but over 100 years behind in contemporary scholarship. It's no wonder that Ferguson, Missouri had America so galvanized in 2014 after the murder of Michael Brown. Their own police chief now has militarized tactics from Israel that is used in the genocide against Palestinians. Fergus Stein. This is why the Black Panther Party always called the police a colonizing army. Back to Bilal. According to traditional Sirah sources, Abu Jahl used to taunt Bilal at night with a spear and threaten Bilal. Once, Abu Jahl had a boulder upon Bilal and said to him, "Disbelieve in the Lord of Muhammad." Bilal replied, "God is one." The cousin of Our Lady Khadijah, Waraka bin Nawfal, was a Unitarian Christian who once passed by Bilal when he was being tortured in this manner, and Waraka bin Nawfal would say to the Quraysh, "I swear by God, if you kill this man, I will certainly make his grave a place of God's compassion." Bilal had already been through so much pain and suffering before Umayyah bin Khalaf set out to torture him, and it is for this reason that Bilal was known to hold extremely firm to his religion. Evil took the form of a Meccan oligarch forcing an enslaved Abyssinian to lay on the blistering hot ground to be exposed to the scorching Arabian sun, sweltering under the crushing weight of a boulder, unable to properly breathe. Lactic acid builds up. Lactic acidosis causes abdominal discomfort, fast shallow breathing, muscle pain and cramping, weakness, and according to the Mayo Clinic, you'd need emergency medical help right away for these symptoms. Imagine that is combined with the symptoms of heat stroke, throbbing headache, confusion, nausea, dizziness, body temperature above 103 degrees Fahrenheit, hot, red, dry or damp skin, rapid and strong pulse, fainting, loss of consciousness, which requires immediate hospitalization. Umayyah bin Khalaf used to say, "I will not stop this or the likes of it unless you die or disbelieve in Muhammad and start worshipping Al-Lat and Al-Uzza." But Bilal would say, "God is one, God is one." Such a statement would have been heresy in the pagan world and would have threatened the Quraysh's profit margins. Bilal's great determination, despite the worst of torture, brought the Quraysh great distress, humiliation and shame. Umayyah became desperate to save his reputation and said, "What bad luck has thrown you upon us, O slave of evil? We are tired of torturing you, as if we are the tortured ones." But Bilal would only simply say, "God is one, God is one," in passive nonviolent resistance. The Prophet Muhammad famously said in a hadith from Sahih Muslim, "Whoever of you sees wrong being committed, let him change it with his hand, i.e., by force. If he is unable to do that, then with his tongue, and if he is unable to do that, then with his heart." Bilal was resisting with his tongue and his heart. This reminds me of a famous literary figure in American literature. While most known for his novel, Moby Dick, Herman Melville also had a short story entitled Bartleby, the Scrivener, a Story of Wall Street, which was published in 1853. It is a story about a Wall Street lawyer who hires a new scrivener, Bartleby, whose passive resistance and repeated refrain of, "I would prefer not to," disrupts the office and baffles his employer. As Bartleby's refusal to engage in capitalism deepens, he also becomes laconic and depressed. His mental health problems cause him to lose his job, become homeless, and die. Bartleby is a mysterious and enigmatic character whose passive resistance and refusal to comply with societal norms define him. Initially diligent and hardworking, Bartleby gradually withdraws from his work and social interactions, repeatedly stating, "I would prefer not to," in response to any request. His demeanor is calm and inscrutable, marked by an impenetrable detachment and dissociation that confounds his employer and co-workers. Bartleby's enigmatic nature and persistent inaction reflect the profound alienation that capitalism causes, an alienation not only from the product of one's own labor, but also from the world around us, ultimately leading to his demise in a state of social isolation, having fallen through the cracks of society. There was no welfare to save him, no fellow human being to come to his rescue, just cold hard capitalism that punishes mental disorders with trauma, poverty, and death. Sink or swim. Even if you swim, better watch out for the sharks. Bartleby embodies themes of existential despair and the dehumanizing effects of modern bureaucracy. The famous Herbert Marcuse was a German-American philosopher, social critic, and political theorist, associated with the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. During her time as a graduate student at the University of Frankfurt, the American theorist and Black Panther Party member and Communist Party of America member, Angela Davis, studied under Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse emigrated to the United States in June 1934, teaching at American universities like Columbia, Harvard, the University of California, San Diego, etc. Herbert Marcuse's notion of alienation centers on the idea that individuals in modern capitalist societies become estranged from their true selves, their work, and each other. He argues that this alienation is driven by the exploitative and dehumanizing nature of capitalist production, where workers are reduced to mere cogs in the machine, performing monotonous tasks that strip away their creativity and individuality. This system prioritizes profit over human needs, leading to a society where people are disconnected from the products of their labor, their natural environment, and even their own desires and potential. Marcuse believes that this pervasive alienation can only be overcome through a radical transformation of society, one that prioritizes human fulfillment and genuine freedom over economic efficiency and consumerism. While modern bureaucracy might remind us of the famous Egyptian Hammamah, which governs all of Cairo with a Kafkaesque bureaucratic nightmare that drives some to terrorism and some to kebab. Wait a minute, what in tarnation does Kafkaesque mean? Franz Kafka was a German-speaking Bohemian Jewish novelist and writer from Prague. He is widely regarded as one of the major figures of 20th century literature. His work fuses elements of realism and surrealism, especially when talking about modern bureaucracies. Bureaucracy is one of modern capitalism's tool of maintaining control over the masses. Constantly change the rules or make them so hard to navigate, and nobody can claim their rights.
I think Kafka was right when he said that for a modern, secular, non-religious man, bureaucracy, state bureaucracy, is the only remaining contact with the dimension of the divine. It is in this scene from Brazil that we see the intimate link between bureaucracy and enjoyment. What the impenetrable omnipotence of bureaucracy harbors is divine enjoyment.
Toughest terrorist, arrest this victim. Mr. Warren. Yes. Mr. Warren. No. This is fact. Definitely no. My name's Larry, Mr. Warren. Sam Larry.
The intense rush of bureaucratic engagement serves nothing.
Glad to have you on board. Yes.
It is the performance of its very purposelessness
You like it up here? This time
that generates an intense enjoyment ready to reproduce itself forever.
expecting big things to accomplish the finance of don't let progress see those. Between you and me, Larry, this no department, tell records to get stuck, is about to be upgraded and... Here we are. Your very own number on your very own door. And behind that door, your very own office. Congratulations, DZ-015. Welcome to the team. Yes. No. Cancel that. Send 2 copies to finance.
The obverse of this is a wonderful scene more towards the beginning of the film.
Harry Tuttle, heating engineer at your service.
The hero, who has a problem in his apartment with plumbing, tries to get the state agency to fix it.
Are you from Central Services?
Of course, 2 guys come, they just want forms to fill in, they do nothing.
I called Central Services.
And then the ultimate subversive figure comes. A kind of clandestine plumberer, played by Robert De Niro.
Just a minute. What was that business with the gun?
Just a precaution, sir. Just a precaution.
Who tells him, just tell me what is the problem, and promises quickly to fix it. This, of course, is the ultimate offense to bureaucracy.
Are you telling me that this is illegal? Thanks.
Listen, kid, we're all in it together.
In the ordinary theological universe, your duty is imposed onto you by God or society, another higher authority, and your responsibility is to do it.
The Trial is a novel written by Franz Kafka in 1914 and 1915 and published posthumously on 26 April 1925, one of his best-known works. It tells the story of Joseph K., a man arrested and prosecuted by a remote, inaccessible authority, with the nature of his crime revealed neither to him nor to the reader. The police come to his house and tell him he's under arrest, but they don't take him to jail. Instead, Joseph has to go through a confusing and strange legal process to try to clear his name. Joseph K. tries to find out what he's accused of and how he can defend himself, but nobody gives him clear answers. He meets lots of people, like lawyers and court officials, but they all seem more interested in keeping the system running than helping him. The courts are in weird places like attics, and everything is really confusing and unfair. Joseph feels more and more lost and frustrated as he tries to make sense of it all. In the end, Joseph K. never learns what crime he's supposed to have committed. The whole trial process feels like a bad dream where nothing makes sense. Eventually, 2 men come to take him away, and Joseph K. doesn't resist. They lead him to a quarry and execute him, and Joseph dies feeling confused and powerless, never understanding why any of it happened. The story shows how scary and unfair the legal system can be when it doesn't make sense and doesn't treat people fairly. Late antique mercantilism, as evinced by Bilal's story, often alienated people as well, but in slightly different ways. The social and economic structures of this period, characterized by rigid class hierarchies and a subsistence-based agrarian system, could contribute to a sense of estrangement. Laborers often worked on large estates owned by wealthy landowners, performing monotonous and physically demanding tasks with little personal investment in the outcome. This lack of control over their work and the fruits of their labor could lead to feelings of powerlessness and disconnect. Moreover, the laborers' status and identity were typically tied to their position within a highly stratified society, limiting their opportunities for social mobility or personal advancement. This societal rigidity reinforced a sense of being trapped in a predetermined role, exacerbating feelings of alienation. The laborers' daily existence was also largely dictated by the demands of the landowners and the rhythms of agricultural cycles, leaving little room for individual expression or autonomy. Additionally, economic pressures such as heavy taxation, debt, and the demands of sustaining both the local community and the broader imperial structure could deepen the laborer's sense of alienation. the constant struggle to meet these obligations, often with minimal resources or support, would further disconnect them from any broader sense of purpose or fulfillment, leaving them feeling isolated and undervalued within the larger societal framework. Often Arab intellectuals have compared Bilal to the Greek figure Sisyphus, who was destined by Zeus to eternally roll a boulder up a hill in the depths of Hades, a story that would have been very well known in the Hellenistic Middle East. Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a hill in the depths of Hades is a powerful metaphor for understanding oppression. In the myth, Sisyphus is condemned to an eternal, futile task. He must repeatedly push a massive boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down each time he nears the top. This endless cycle of effort without progress mirrors the experiences of individuals under oppressive systems. Oppression often involves repetitive, exhausting labor or struggles that yield little to no advancement for the oppressed. Just as Sisyphus's labor is unending and meaningless, those under oppression may feel that their efforts to improve their situation are continually thwarted by structural barriers. This can lead to a sense of hopelessness and futility, as no matter how hard they work, the oppressive system keeps them from achieving lasting change or success. Furthermore, the myth highlights the lack of autonomy and choice faced by the oppressed. Sisyphus has no control over his fate. His punishment is imposed upon him by external forces, just as oppressive regimes or societal structures impose limitations and hardships on individuals. The lack of control and the inevitability of the struggle create a profound sense of alienation and disenfranchisement. In essence, Sisyphus's eternal struggle symbolizes the relentless and often hopeless fight against oppressive forces, illustrating how such systems dehumanize individuals and reduce their efforts to mere survival rather than allowing for growth and fulfillment. As in the case of Bilal, may God be pleased with him with as much pleasure as God has knowledge, every day until the final day. Amen. Bilal did not know if he was going to live much longer. For all he knew, he would die with a boulder on his chest, but he was ready to accept the fate of a martyr. I will speculate, for the Quraysh to be so concerned with their reputation in this affair likely meant that all of Mecca was talking about it. It is no surprise then that the Muslims were paying very close attention and worked diligently to come up with a plan to save their brother Bilal. Abu Bakr clandestinely made a plan to raise money and free Bilal from his torture. This not only makes a major statement to the Quraysh, but also shows that the Muslims have more financial power than the Quraysh initially thought. The Prophet's cousin Al-Abbas, may God be pleased with him, was the one to give the gold to Umayyah, so that he would not get suspicious that the Muslims were behind this. The Muslims used deception and spycraft to free the oppressed, although some narrations state that Abu Bakr was the one who paid Umayyah, which would have let the Quraysh know that the Muslims not only have elders, but elite members of the Quraysh on their side, i.e., Abu Bakr, may God be pleased with him. After all, the Quraysh were businessmen at the end of the day, who were more concerned with profit than humanity. They'd rather sell a man than have him be a profitless investment. Bilal said to Abu Bakr, "If you have bought me for yourself, then keep me, but if you have bought me for God's sake, then leave me for God's work." The Prophet, peace be upon him, and the companions celebrated upon Bilal's manumission. Abu Bakr is said to have freed 6 other enslaved people after Bilal, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, would give Abu Bakr the name Atiq, meaning the freed one, as he was free from the hellfire. Many years later, Omar bin al-Khattab used to love to say, "Abu Bakr, our master, has freed our master," i.e., Bilal. These were the deep bonds the companions had for one another. One may look at this story philosophically and metaphorically. What rock do you have upon your chest? What oppression or duress do you find yourself under? What pressures do you feel crushed by? In life, there is always a boulder upon our chest, and we must make a conscious decision. Are we going to be like Sisyphus wallowing in uselessness, or are we going to be like Bilal bin Rabah al-Habashi, whose difficulties made him discover his own strength, will, and determination? Pain will teach you a lesson, whereas pride will prevent you from learning. Bilal's biography offers profound lessons on modern incarceration, slavery, and policing. particularly in how systems of oppression and resistance have evolved and persisted over time. Bilal, an Abyssinian slave in Mecca who later became a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad, is celebrated for his resilience, faith, and eventual liberation, highlighting several key themes: systemic oppression and racism, resilience and resistance, the role of faith and liberation, reformation and inclusion, and finally, policing and authority. Bilal's initial status as a slave and his subsequent treatment underscore the intersection of race and systemic oppression. Modern parallels can be drawn to how marginalized communities, particularly people of African descent, often face disproportionate rates of incarceration and discriminatory policing practices. Bilal's experience reminds us that racism and economic exploitation are deeply intertwined issues that continue to shape contemporary society. The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness is a 2010 book by Michelle Alexander, a civil rights litigator and legal scholar, which explains how incarceration makes you an inferior economic class, a class of untouchables who cannot rent housing, who cannot get hired for the most basic jobs, and who end up in poverty. Recidivism is common, as this subaltern class doesn't have employment to secure food. Put another way, Alexander argues that the sudden and dramatic mass incarceration of African American men, primarily through the war on drugs, has created a new racial undercaste, a group of people defined largely by race that is subject to legalized discrimination, scorn, and social exclusion. Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents is a nonfiction book by the American journalist Isabel Wilkerson, published in 2020. The book describes racism in the United States as an aspect of a caste system, i.e., a society-wide system of social stratification characterized by notions such as hierarchy, inclusion and exclusion, and purity. Wilkerson does so by comparing aspects of the experience of American people of color to the caste systems of India and Nazi Germany, and she explores the impact of caste on societies shaped by them and their people. Wilkerson pries open the lid on this country's racism and exposes the underlying truth that from the beginning, America has created a caste society, whites on the top, those of African descent on the bottom. Despite severe torture and oppression, Bilal remained steadfast in his beliefs, symbolizing the power of resilience and resistance. His story can inspire modern movements to abolish unjust incarceration and resist systemic racism with our tongues, hearts, and force. His story emphasizes the importance of perseverance and solidarity in the face of oppression. Bilal's resistance also illustrates the enduring human spirit and the quest for dignity and justice. His eventual liberation by Abu Bakr, an act prompted by his conversion to Islam and the early Muslim community's values, highlights the role of faith and collective action in challenging and dismantling systems of slavery. This can be paralleled with modern advocacy and reform efforts that often draw on moral, ethical, and religious motivations to fight against unjust incarceration and modern prison slave labor. Bilal's elevated status in the early Muslim community after his emancipation, becoming the first caller to prayer, exemplifies the potential for transformative justice and the inclusion of the formerly enslaved into society as equals, and even as superiors. This serves as a model for contemporary efforts to reintegrate formerly incarcerated individuals into society, advocating for restorative justice practices that emphasize rehabilitation and social inclusion over punishment and exclusion. The brutal treatment Bilal endured at the hands of his master serves as a historical example of the abuse of power and authority, akin to modern instances of police brutality. It underscores the need for abolishing systems of policing and authority to prevent abuse and protect the rights and dignity of all individuals. Bilal bin Rabah al-Habashi's life story, therefore, provides valuable insights into the enduring issues of modern incarceration, slavery, and policing, emphasizing the need for systemic change, resilience, and the pursuit of justice and equality for all people. May God be pleased with our Master Bilal.